Be very, very quiet. We're hunting John Krasinski's. Hello, interwebs, and welcome to my review of A Quiet Place Part 2. I was very much looking forward to this movie. I was so disappointed when, at the beginning of this pandemic last year, that this was one of the first, if not the first, movie to be delayed, and it kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. And so I was just so pumped for this movie, and I was so excited to finally see this movie come out because I loved the first Quiet Place movie. It's so rare, especially as someone who's a big fan of indie horror, that I see a sort of bigger budget, sort of studio produced horror movie that really gets me and really surprises me. Every so often you see something like that, like Us or, Get Out, but most of the time I find big budget horror to be kind of bland as compared to the indie horror that I'm a huge fan of. And A Quiet Place Part 1 was one of those movies that just came out of the gate, shocked me, especially coming from John Krasinski, who I've always liked, especially from his Office days, but just seeing him direct and star and sort of do this movie in such a unique way, with a unique twist, was truly phenomenal. So coming into Part 2, I was really expecting a lot from this movie. And I have to say, this movie holds up. I feel like it is not as good as the first movie, mostly on the back of the fact that I feel like the themes and story of this film are not as strong and resonant as the first film, and there's a couple problems here and there that I sort of have tweaks with. But on the whole, this is still a pulse-pounding, tense horror thriller that had me on the edge of my seat, but never loses sight of the emotion, and also presents a really technical marvel as well that just uses the medium of film in a way that you so rarely see, especially big budget horror, but really movies in general doing today, like using all elements of it, particularly the sound, to just build tension. But not only just sound, editing, script, acting, all of it comes together to just make a visual work of art. And this movie just it just stands on its own. Is a true masterwork of horror, and I am just so excited to see more of what John Krasinski does. But let's get into this. I'm going to keep this fairly spoiler free, but I want to gush about how tense this movie was. I've already alluded to this, but the technical aspect of this film is just so amazing. The use of sound, I mean, obviously with the idea of a quiet place, this idea that these monsters can hear sound, the use of sound in this film is just so pulse pounding. There's constant shifts in perspective of sound. There's different levels of quiet. Like we have the return of our sort of main child character who is deaf from the first movie. I forget her name, unfortunately. Apologies to the character and to the film. But she's come back for this movie. And whenever we're in her perspective, we hear nothing. There is no sound. And I saw this movie in a theater, my first time back in a theater in a long time because of this pandemic. And it was very much like I had like a bag of candy, and I was just very much like, crunch. And like the people over to me, I'm like, oh God, I hope they don't annoy me. So you have that sort of perspective of like no sound whatsoever. But then there's also moments where things will shift perspective to another character when the story of the scene focuses in on another character from her, and you'll have sound come back up. But it won't be like a raucous amount of sound. It'll just be like, oh, we just hear like the quiet bits of nature or the footsteps going on around them. And then obviously we have sort of perspectives of the scene itself, of just like the world around them. That's just the perspective of characters. And the movie does such a great job of communicating when those visual shifts happen, both within the auditory nature of it and the visual nature. It just marries it so well. Just the audio, and then when the sound gets tense and big and loud, you feel it because there are small moments, but every single moment is just a moment of like, oh my God, this is tense. This could get them killed. Always at the edge of your seat with any noise that goes on here. There is one sequence in this movie towards the top of this film where there is a character that makes a loud noise, and I won't say how or why. I don't want to spoil the surprise for you, but this character is making a lot of noise for a particular reason. I was like, oh my God, I understand why you're making this noise, but I understand it, but I'm just freaking out. I'm just like, please stop. Please shut up. Please shut up. You're killing me. You're killing me. You're going to kill yourself. And you feel that tension. And it is, it is so good. The other thing too that I want to praise is the editing. There are several sequences throughout this film. I think of the middle sort of a big beat and the end big beat, where there are multiple things going on in different planes of action in different areas of the world. but the editing sort of cross-cuts them so well that you really get a sense of like it's all building up to a climax together. And the match cuts across each other, just you could tell that the cinematographer and John Krasinski really planned out how to edit this when they were shooting it, because there's so much like it cross-cuts so well despite different planes of action, different things going on, and it just creates this sense of like everything building to a crescendo together. That is truly, truly amazing. Also, I should say, everyone in this movie is giving their A game. Cillian Murphy coming in to sort of pseudo-replace John Krasinski in the sort of lead guy role of the film, does a phenomenal job throughout this piece. He really conveys the sense of like a broken man who is still a good guy at heart, who's still trying his best, but just has been so much more broken than John Krasinski's character was in the first movie. And Emily Blunt also does a great job as well. I do feel like Emily Blunt is a little bit cast aside a little bit throughout this movie in favor of Cillian Murphy, which is a little bit disappointing. She kind of goes into a little bit more of a caregiver role. I mean, that's understandable because she is a mother character, and now she's a sort of single mother taking care of these kids and now a baby. But I was like, I'm kind of sad that the woman character kind of gets relegated to that caregiver role throughout the film, as opposed to Cillian Murphy gets to be the more like sort of active protagonist. But so I was a little bit disappointed in that, because Emily Blunt, I know, can bring it, and she can bring the badassness, and when she does bring the badassness in this movie, it is amazing. But I was a little bit disappointed that she was sort of relegated off to the side a little bit throughout this film. It's not the most egregious, not the worst, but it was something I was like, okay, a little bit disappointed by that. The other thing, too, that I will say, and I kind of alluded to this earlier as well, where I feel like the themes of this movie aren't as strong as the first one. The first one was strong not only because of the tense, world building of it and the tense sequences of the first film, but it had this wonderful discussion of fatherhood and learning to let go and letting your kids sort of take their own agency in the world, and sort of trusting them and sort of passing on the torch to the next generation, and this sort of discussion of just being a parent that was just so powerful in the first movie, and also the sense of loss as well. And that theme continues into this movie. It's still resonant. You still get the sense of like, okay, now the torch has been passed, now that John Krasinski's character has passed away from the first movie, and so you see that being carried forward and the kids being much more proactive protagonists. But then Cillian Murphy sort of comes in and sort of, there's this sort of like expectation placed on his character that's like, oh, well, you're not John Krasinski, you're not him, you're not as good as him. And I sort of like feel like the movie wants me to feel that. It's like, oh, he's not as good. But it's like, the guy never was trying to be. He never asked to have that thrust upon him. He's just a character that they come across. And yes, it kind of makes sense. I'm not saying he sort of comes out of nowhere. But it was just sort of like this weird forcing him into this like father role and sort of judging him for not measuring up to that a little bit too harshly. And I feel it was like kind of forcing it a little bit more than it needed to be. It ultimately works in the end. The way he relates to the other characters throughout the movie does come to make sense and be emotionally moving by the end of the film. But I feel like the film was trying a little bit too hard to force him thematically into that position. That it was kind of like, oh, this doesn't fit as naturally as the first film did. There's also this theme of the movie too of like, oh, there's evil people out there in the world that's kind of fallen down and crumbled, which is kind of standard for sort of a post-apocalyptic film. Like, you see everything from The Walking Dead to The Last of Us, like, it's not really the monsters that are the danger, it's the humans. And that gets brought up a few times here, and there's one notable sequence where we do encounter that sort of thing, but it ultimately feels like a side note. And so for the movie to like highlight it so much as like a theme feels a little bit like, oh, okay, I didn't okay, you're kind of doing the same thing that other movies have done, but then not really focusing on it. And I will say there is a subversion of it at the end of the film in a kind of surprising way. So I understand why they built it up there, but again, it sort of just feels kind of standard. And while it's being subverted, it didn't really feel like it was as, as resonant as it could have been, as really fleshed out as it could have been. But overall, still not a bad theme. It's not like it's bad. It's just not, it's not as strong as the first movie. None of these are bad things. It's just sort of like, oh, the first movie was just such a powerful thematic piece, and maybe I'm being a bit unfair to this movie, judging it off of that. Because if, taking in a vacuum, this one, bit my tongue there for a second. Taking in a vacuum, this would still be a strong film, regardless of, comparing it to the first one. But judging it based as a sequel, it is a slightly lesser feeling to that. But even beyond that, like I said, this movie is just a true pulse-pounding, tense thriller. I didn't even mention the first 15 minutes of this movie, which is sort of like a prequel to the first film. I mean, that's sort of revealed in the trailers. It's not really all that surprising. And those first 15 minutes are so tense, and you're just on the edge of your seat throughout all of it. But it is by no means even the most tense sequence in the film. I really feel like this is a great film. The only other knock I could even put against it is I feel like the ending's a tad abrupt. It's not bad by any means, but it just sort of like ends, and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess that's the end there. But again, it's not bad. It's just sort of like, oh, okay, I could have used a little bit more, but I guess that's probably a good thing, leaving me wanting a little bit more. So yeah, ultimately at the end of the day, this is a phenomenal film, a true horror masterpiece, and has me very excited for anything John Krasinski does in the future. Hopefully maybe he'll get to do A Quiet Place Part 3, but honestly, if this series stops at this movie, I will feel satisfied and happy with this, duo of films, because these are both fantastic movies, and I don't feel like they need to be expanded upon, but I will give Krasinski the benefit of the doubt if that's what he wants to do next, but I am also excited to see everything he does after this. So, phenomenal job. I truly loved this movie, and I'm excited to see what he does next. So, that's what I thought of the movie, but I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down in the comments below. Did you like A Quiet Place Part 2? I'd love to hear all of that. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more reviews. I also have my main channel, Jessie Gender, where I do my sort of more video essay-focused stuff. That's sort of my main channel. But I also have a Patreon as well that you can help support me doing what I do. But beyond all of that, I hope that you, as always, live long and stay sexy.